they need somebody to work with Ricky, and I borrowed a pair of, I didn't have my tights or anything with me. I had a pair of borrowed tights, a pair of boots, and went out and put Ricky over. But
how come you weren't at WrestleMania VII? Now, I looked at your match listings, and you seem to be gone for about 6 months between June of 91. So was it just
that's
injury?
Why.
Oh, that's why you went back home.
No, that's why. Yeah, my dad, in late December, the WWF was in Portland, Maine. And I would call home every day. My dad was 48 when I was born, and I'd had friends their dads died at like 41 or 42. So I had this sort of morbid fear my entire life that something's going to happen to my dad. And I called home one day from Portland. I was supposed to work with Mike Rotunda that night and put him over. And I called home, and my stepmother told me, your dad can't come to the phone. He can't breathe, but he won't go to the hospital. So I flew out to the airport. Pat Tanaka drove literally down city sidewalks and through a park to get me to the plane right as they were closing the door. And I got to Pittsburgh. I'd called my sister and brother-in-law. They met me there. I walked in, and my dad's fingernails and his lips were, bluish, like on this bottle, like this color blue. He wasn't transferring oxygen. And got him to the hospital, and they told us initially he had 3 to 5 days to live. And the old bugger fought through it and was in the hospital for like 34 or 5 days, went home and lived 2 or 3 more years. They were just tough old birds, those people. And but he couldn't live alone. He was going to be on oxygen. And so, all my other siblings were all married and living in different parts of the country and everything. So being his only son, it sort of fell on me. And I don't say that in a negative way. I was happy to be able to do that. And that was, by the way, what originally reignited my desire to go back into medicine. I'd always wanted to be a doctor, and I'd sort of veered away from it. And my ex-wife one day said, like, she went with me, and I would take my dad to get these procedures called thoracenteses. It's where you hunch over a desk or a table. They numb your back. They put this huge needle in, and they draw the fluid off your lungs, off your air sacs, the interstitial space between your lungs and heart. And once he had that done, he'd feel much better. When I took my wife with me, she was standing in the room. Poor kid in the next room had gotten a compound fracture of his leg, and my dad's having this thing done. So my wife keeps like going like this, and like not wanting to look. And I'm like glued to my dad and watching what's going on in this room. And we got in the car that night, and she said, "How could you stand to look at that?" And I said, "How could you stand not to watch?" I said, "It's enthralling, And she knew about, he wanted to be a doctor. And she said, like, some off the cuff remark, like, "Why don't you go back to school?" And I thought, well, I was teaching at the time. The school would pay for it. And I did. I went to night school for 2 years, got accepted to medical school. Like a fool didn't go. But I think my dad survived as long as he did after being in the hospital that close to death, because I was there to take him to the hospital every 2 or 3 weeks to get that done. And I could see, having taken my medical courses, I would be able to see something probably earlier before it compounded that other people would see. But if you're on oxygen, my dad being a smoker, and I found out later he was still smoking in the house, with a canister of oxygen in that house, that could have been, pure oxygen is explosive. And so, we had to keep a pretty close eye on that. Necessitated me getting a job teaching, which took me that direction. And then later back to WCW and then ECW. So
forgive me for bringing this back to wrestling slightly, because I know we've got it's a different story we'll tell for another day, the character that we're going to come up for you, the whole Bon Jovi thing, we'll delve into that another time. But for eagle-eyed fans of your career in 91, you put in quite a lot of time in the Royal Rumble that year. So they clearly had some plans for you. Then you leave, I'm seeing a week afterwards, basically, and then you disappear for a good 5 months. But then you actually return for about a month, just doing house shows here and there. I'm looking at who, well, quite frankly, beat you. You Dino Bravo, Barbarian, Colonel Mustafa, which is the Iron Sheik, Smash, and I think your last match here, it says Marty Jannetty and Shane Douglas defeat the Orient Express. So how come you ended up going back for about a month before just calling it quits?
I think my contract ran through that time. And if I recall correctly, those were shows that were closer to Pittsburgh that I could drive.
Well, I'll tell you, in fact. So we have Madison Square Garden, we have the Cow Palace in San Francisco, we've got Denver, we've got New Haven, Connecticut, we've got Worcester. Is it Worcester or Worcester? How do you spell it?
Worcester, yeah.
Massachusetts, and the last one, Pittsburgh.
Yeah, then it would have been there was still time on my contract, and Vince probably, and if I'm not mistaken, somewhere in there was a match with Ricky Steamboat. I actually wrestled Ricky Steamboat in Youngstown, Ohio. I was there as just say hello to my friends, and they need somebody to work with Ricky, and I borrowed a pair of, I didn't have my tights or anything with me. I had a pair of tights, a pair of boots, and went out and put Ricky over. But I'm guessing in hindsight, it probably was me still having time on my contract. When I did leave WWF, and I went to my dad to Vince and explained to my father and the whole thing I explained to you. He very kindly sat with me. It was in Niagara Falls for an hour and a half, it seemed. We were in the convention side of the building, just he and I sitting at a table talking. And he, at the end, said to me, "You've been a great employee. Family always comes first. The door's always open." And left. And I think I did that just to keep my foot in the door with them and help them out on their end. And like I said, when I went back in '95, I saw none of that. Like, it was a completely different place than I had seen previously. And it wasn't just like my take on it. I was watching friends of mine, like Buddy Rose, I think, was gone by that time. Haku, Barbarian, those guys were, you could see like they were tensed. It seemed like a dynamically different company by the time I'd gone back in there. So, but nothing negative to say about my 1991 run there. Enjoyed it, and I thought Vince was a true pro. And I actually made a lot more money on that run that I did with the Dean Douglas run as the top heel of the company.